India's retail inflation has eased to 4.83% in April versus 4.85% in March. This is the lowest retail inflation in 11 months. However, food inflation continues to rise, with food inflation at 8.7% in April versus 8.52% in March. Joining us to decode all of this inflation data is business economist Sanchita Mukherjee. Sanchita, thank you for your time. Well, for those looking at this inflation data, the good news, retail inflation easing. However, food inflation continues to rise. So going forward, is that an area of concern?
Yes, thank you so much, Sakshi, for having me over. Now, these are some of the facts which keep coming out, quarter on quarter. How does it affect us as ordinary citizenry, investors, and all of that? One needs to be mindful that actually India's inflation, if compared to the rest of the world, as a basket case of all food, energy, core inflation, wholesale price inflation, is actually quite good in terms of numbers, right? So, as citizen of India, we would be happy to know that we are not undergoing a cost of living crisis, which a lot of first world developed markets are going through because of certain issues that they have been faced with post COVID. Why do we not? Why are we not going through this issue? Why are we better poised as an economy? Why are the inflation numbers better? It's because of massive reforms which happened on the economy, which has kept the inflation numbers actually very low. However, having said that, India as a country is very, very contingent to weather volatilities, climate change aspect. Hence, the food prices and the energy, especially the food prices, electrification, things like these energy needs, is a very, very uncertain variable. So, RBI is very, very mindful of that, and that's why rates are still on hold. I do not have an opinion whether there be a rate cut this year. However, if the inflation numbers, the core inflation numbers, the retail inflation, which is the CPI numbers, continue on a downward trajectory, we can expect more monetary liquidity coming into the system in terms of easing the liquidity system by RBI. So that can be expected. Having said that, I think post elections, when the budget is presented, if there are certain very transformational reforms that come, especially in the agricultural sector, in the rural sector, this would actually aid in making inflation numbers even better for us as a country. So I'm very, very optimistic on that aspect.
Right, but Sanchita, vegetable and pulses inflation has remained elevated. It has remained in double-digit percentage terms. Is that going to be an area of concern going forward, or will the monsoon and the projections there help?
I think the monsoon and the projections given will help. We have had a massive, as stated by the governor himself, we have had a very good Rabi wheat production. So that's a bonus. The Kharif production is slated to be very good, given that the monsoon forecasts are very good. Having said that, climate change is a huge variable. So, although the monsoon projection has been touted to be very good, we do not really know the distribution and how it happens. A lot of times, it's an overkill in certain areas and a drought-like situation in certain areas. Having said that, the projections are all very well-meaning and optimistic. So, keeping fingers crossed, food prices should ideally be transitory.
Right. Another thing that's really coming out of this data, of course, we have spoken about rural versus urban in other aspects, but another thing that's coming out of the recent data is that look, rural inflation is at 5.43%, while urban inflation is at 4.11% as per the latest data released. So going forward, how do you read this estimate for those sitting at home and saying that, look, this is the data coming in, but rural lifestyles and incomes are very different to, of course, urban lifestyles and incomes. And the fact that rural inflation is outweighing urban inflation, is that also an area of concern going forward?
It's not at all an area of concern. Rather, it's an area of optimism, and I think it's a boon. We need to look at it a little differently. What does inflation really mean? Inflation also means that there's a certain amount of demand coming into the system, right? As a country, we've been struggling to get rural demand for the last 3 to 4 years, right? Vis-a-vis urban demand, rural demand, wage growth was just not happening. So it's actually a bright spot that you're seeing a bit of rural inflation, which goes on to say that people are buying even with the higher prices, which means to say that the demand is sticky in nature. So rural inflation, a bit of it, slightly higher than urban inflation, I would see it as a bright spot.
All right, so you will see it as a bright spot. Thank you so much for really decoding the highlights for our viewers and for those sitting at home and trying to make sense of the latest inflation data.
Thank you so much.